This year, the elders have selected the theme of Be Bold and Courageous for Christ, taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 16. And so they've asked me to speak on that occasionally, about once a month. So this would be maybe a good time for us to talk a little bit about this idea of being strong in the Lord. And there's maybe many different examples of people that had great courage and bravery, that were willing to take a stand, willing to overcome, and were actually victorious throughout the pages of Scripture. And so one of those is David, as the Scripture reading. We just saw how he was willing to stand up, to be strong, to take a stand, and he was victorious. So the lesson is, be like David. That's easy to say, though, isn't it? Just to be like David. Well, what did David do? What were things that David was thinking and processing, and how was he able to have this courage? We're not going to read through the entire event of 1 Samuel chapter 17, but it may be helpful when we think about what he was going through and what the people of Israel were also going through. They found themselves up against a very large opponent, a giant. And the giant was mocking. They were mocking the people, and they were also mocking God. But here's a man who was willing to be a man of bravery. And again, it seems like a lot of the movies we watch, we enjoy seeing a hero, maybe sometimes somebody who's unexpected, to take a stand and to fight for what's right, and maybe even in the face of fear, in the face possibly even of death, they are still willing to rise up. It's probably not a lot of people that are willing to do that. But what made David in this situation rise up? To be the man out of all of Saul's army, to say, we can do this. And when we say we, it really meant David and God. He wasn't really expecting the army to do much. The problem was there was a lot of fear. And I was just thinking about what they were going through, and so I had a few things written down. And maybe these are similar things that we go through. There was a problem. And maybe we have problems in our life. We have challenges. Not only was there a problem, there was pain, right? So they were feeling very defeated. They were feeling like there was nothing they could do. And so there was paralysis. And the fourth thing that they had is this thing was perpetual. So here's this great giant, mocking, taunting, saying, come and fight me. And he did this for 40 days. And you can imagine just over, like the first day was difficult, but after 40 days of hearing the same thing over and over again, your confidence and your ability to maybe even think reasonably dwindles each day. And maybe that's why when David showed up, he heard it for the first time, and he was like, why doesn't somebody act? Why doesn't somebody take on the challenge? Why doesn't somebody else stand? And so we want to see the challenge that was involved here, but also see how David was able to overcome. There was conversations that David had with the army of Saul, and also conversations he had with Saul. And through this, we may be able to see some of the thought process. But we know that David knew something about his life, that when he was young, even before this time, he was anointed, in other words, chosen specifically by God through the prophet Samuel to be the next king of Israel. And that was not done based on David's appearance or his qualifications or his strength. Certainly was not because of his age. And it was not because of what his brothers thought of him. This says, God does not look at the exterior, the outside. He does not look at the flesh, but God looks at the heart. Now, this is what God told Samuel. He says, you appoint, you choose, you anoint David to be the next king. Probably David, about 16, 17 years old, some commentators would believe. Young boy. I wonder if David knew this. Because when you look at a Goliath in the eye, could you not, even in your own mind, say, God doesn't look at how big he is, doesn't look at how strong he is, doesn't look at all the threats that he can make? King Saul said to David, you're only a boy, you don't have any experience. This man's been fighting since he was a youth. He's qualified. He's the best that the people had. And so here he is standing up. Do you think David thought, that's nothing? Yeah, it looks pretty impressive on the outside, but you want to know something? God looks at the heart. And so that would have given David courage to say, we can overcome. Because his heart is not right. His heart is not good. So 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 3 and 4, the Philistines occupied one hill, the Israelites the other. The valley in between them, the champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp, and his height was 6 cubits and a span. And again, most people say that's about 9 foot 9 inches. He was covered with armor of bronze, kind of like a coat of mail. His armor weighed 125 pounds. He had a bronze helmet. He had a sword, a shield, a javelin, and a spear. And the spear weighed about 15 pounds. So he was big, he was equipped, and he was able to fight. So here's the opponent. And yet here comes David. And he surveys the situation, and he knows that victory is found in God. It's not found in the things of the world. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 10, the Philistines said, this day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man. So it's just one man. It's just going to be one fight, one man against one man. And let us fight each other. And hearing this, the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. And those are the words that often come up in the Old Testament that we talk about, that the people were fearful. The people shrank back. The people were defeated before the engagement even began. Do not fear. Do not be afraid. How many times does it say that? But this is what they were. They were fearful and terrified. And so depending on what the translation that we look at, the New American says they were dismayed and very fearful. The King James says they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So dismayed is they were just discouraged. They had no ability inside themselves to say, let's do something, let's do anything. They were paralyzed because of their fear. And that's oftentimes what fear does. And so we are not denying there's an opponent. We're not denying it looks powerful. We're not denying that maybe a lot of people are afraid of this. But what is our response? And how do we react then to this situation? For 40 days the Philistine came every morning and every evening, and he took his stand. But the problem is nobody in Israel was willing to take a stand. They didn't know what to do. It almost seems, again, kind of comical because every day the people lined up on both sides of the valley. So they were kind of, on the hill or maybe in a little bit of a mountainous area. And here's the valley between. The Israelites came out every day. You think it'd be like, why do we even go out there? Like, let's just stay home. But they go out and say, well, maybe today's the day. Maybe somebody's going to stand up. Maybe we're going to fight this guy. Maybe Goliath, had a heart attack and he died, and they're going to send somebody out a lot smaller and weaker, and we'd feel a lot better. I don't know why they came out every day, but the Israelites were out there every day just looking and watching, but they were defeated every day before the battle even started. And so this is the struggle. Maybe it's a struggle that we have in our life of feeling defeated, feeling there's no hope. Where is the victory? What do we do? What can we do? So this is what David said, both to the people and also when he was talking to King Saul. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. So there's three things that he says here. First of all, he says, I have come today because I have been faithful in my role as a shepherd. I have been strong, I've been brave, and I have had victory when no one was looking. I was out on the back fields with sheep, and I was willing to do the right thing. And he was able then, because of his experience, and we're going to find out he did have quite a bit of experience with the weapon of his choice, which was a sling. And he said, I've been able to do that. So, application today. If you want to be able to fight a battle in your private life, in times when no one is looking, maybe times where you think it's not even that big of a deal if a lion or a bear comes and take a few sheep, what in the world are a few sheep? No big deal. But he stood his ground. He was willing to fight, literally we'd say put his own life on the line in times where maybe it was peaceful. Maybe times where he could have said, it's not a big deal. But he did the right thing. Maybe if we're unwilling to do the right thing in the small areas of our life, we think the insignificant areas of our life, in the private area of our life when nobody else is going to find out, if we don't do it then, probably not going to happen when the big battle starts and there's a Goliath in front of us. So, lesson one, be faithful with the small things. Secondly, he realizes that Goliath has defied, he's gone against, he's mocked and ridiculed the armies of God. It's not just the army, it's just not us, it's just not standing for nationalism. This is taking a stand for God. He has sinned against God. He's not just, mocked us. We have to take a stand for God. And if we take a stand for God, then God's going to be with us. He's going to strengthen us, and he'll give us the victory. So he believed in the power of God. He believed that if we take a stand for God, God will be there. So in a similar way, we have to make sure when we are fighting an opponent that this is a battle that needs to be fought. Not every battle needs to be fought. But if this is a place where we do take a stand, we believe that God will be with us and he will strengthen us. But the other thing that's kind of interesting in his comments here, and again, perhaps a little bit of a sensitive topic, is this uncircumcised Philistine. Because it's mentioned twice in this chapter. When things are mentioned twice, sometimes it actually means something. And if you look at the entire Bible, very seldom does it does sometimes in other places, talk about people that are uncircumcised. So what does this operation on a small boy have to do with this war we're about to fight, with this Goliath? I mean, what's the deal? Well, this is what David's saying. He's outside the covenant. He does not belong to God. God has no relationship with him. God has no requirement to fill in coming to his aid or strengthening him or being on his side. He is uncircumcised. And look what he says. See, it's the lion and the bear. You know what part of the problem with the lion and the bear is? They too were uncircumcised, which just simply means they're outside of a covenant with God. And we know that because they're an animal. They don't have a soul. They're not trying to, figure out who to worship. But Goliath is not much different than the lion and the bear, outside of a relationship with God. So we find victory because we are in a relationship with God, and we realize that many people in the world, or maybe even any of the opposition that we have, it's not necessarily from a person, maybe it's a teaching or an ideology, or it could be a law, it could be a lot of things, but it's outside the will and the covenant of God. So when I'm in the covenant, I realize I'm going to be protected. I'm going to be blessed. God's going to strengthen me. And again, we know it doesn't mean we're going to have victory in every area of our life, but God is going to give us the strength to overcome. We trust in him because we have this covenant. And David's saying, I've seen how this worked. I'm relying on the past, where God has showed himself to be strong and faithful, and he's helped me overcome even these other obstacles I have in my life. So David said to the Philistine, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. So David's saying, Goliath, you look pretty big and strong. You've got military equipment, a lot more stuff than I do. He just came out with a staff, one staff, and his stones, and then also his sling. That's all he had. So yeah, you come out here pretty strong and mighty in your own power, but I'm coming in a different power. I'm trusting in God. I'm trusting not in my own ability. And again, we're not discounting David's ability to be a slinger. You know, that's difficult to do. But we know even in the Old Testament, there were people that were very good at using a sling. Some of the men of the army, they could use a sling, and it says they could hit within a hair. In other words, I mean, that's pretty accurate. I mean, that would almost be like people today using a gun with a scope. That's how accurate they were with using a sling. So you don't think about, and it's not one of those slings that you pull back, because that's a very weak sling. It's not going to do much. This is a sling that is long, maybe 3 or 4 feet. And when you put the stone in, oftentimes the stone would maybe be the size of a golf ball or maybe a tennis ball. And people even say that the rocks in the Middle East were very hard. They're very dense. So we may think of a baseball player today being able to throw, we're pretty impressed with somebody who can throw something close to 100 miles an hour. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? So the idea of a baseball player, he's able to do that with his arm. And depending on how long his arm is, that kind of dictates about how much force, or maybe even we'd say leverage, probably not for you people that are engineers. But if you could extend your arm another 3 feet and throw that same ball, again, didn't do the engineering and the math, physics, how fast could that go? So some people say a good slinger can throw a rock over 200 miles an hour. And some people say a good slinger can throw a rock as far as distance over 200 yards. That's 2 football fields. I mean, you don't see a pitcher throwing something that far. So this is quite a weapon. But he didn't rely on his ability. He didn't say, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. I'm going to catch him off guard. I can hit him right between the eyes. He's saying, I'm going to trust in God. And so it seemed like there was kind of a combination there of something that he could do with a gift he had. Because you remember what Saul said? Here, put on my armor. And again, if you could just remember Saul one more time, head and shoulders above everybody else, and David, a teenager, maybe not even fully grown yet. And David put it on and said, I can't even use this. The old translations say, I've not tested this. In other words, I've never put this on before, and I can't use. I'm not going to go out in your idea of what you think victory looks like. You think that this is really going to help. What we really know is all that suit of armor on David, that would have been a hindrance. So we're not trying to fight according to man's way, according to what the world says. We fight based on what God would have us to do, but we trust in him that we'll have the victory. So he used his ability, and yet he also trusted in God that this was going to actually work in the name of the Lord. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 46, this day the Lord will deliver you. And again, it comes up over and over that God is the one who's going to give the victory I'll strike you down, cut off your head. This day I will give your carcass of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there's a God in Israel. Again, so what's the point? It's to honor God, glorify God. You've defamed the name of the Lord, yet now the name of the Lord is going to be glorified. It's going to be elevated, that people are going to know there is a God in Israel. And again, we would almost say this must have been miraculous, at least what David thought was going to happen, that God was intervening, that people would say, there's no way man could do that on his own. It must have been by the hand of God. And so the idea is that it's not the God of the Baals or the God of Asherah. It's not the God of the Philistines. It's Jehovah God is the one who's going to be honored and glorified. That's where we find victory, by trusting in God, by being faithful to God, by knowing that he has chosen us, he's appointed us, he's allowed us to be in covenant with him. He's going to equip us with strength. And in the end, we just know that he's the one who's going to get the honor. And so, yeah, we have struggles, we have problems, we have difficulties, challenges, roadblocks. Maybe we have giants in our life that sometimes feel and seem overwhelming. They seem like they're undefeated, that they're just controlling the way we think and the way we act and the way we respond and what we talk about. It's controlling, but we can be free in the name of the Lord. Because we know it's God's will that the giants that try to destroy us would be defeated. And the giants that mock the name of the Lord will be brought down. And so we can have confidence. We can have this courage that we've been talking about to be strong in the name of the Lord. We always give an opportunity for people to respond. If today you would like to make the commitment to say, I want to be on God's side. I want to be in covenant with him. I want to be a part of his family and even a part of his army where I can find victory. And today, the sign of the covenant is not circumcision, but the sign of the covenant is baptism. That when we surrender our life to God, to say, I trust you, and I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to be a faithful. We're singing about those songs about being a soldier of the cross. We're going to be faithful to God. And if today you want to be baptized in the name of Christ, we always give that opportunity and that invitation. And if we can pray with you, let us know then how we can be a blessing as we sing this song. I did have one more slide, but skip over that one. Who will follow Jesus? And we're going to sing this, and we want to encourage you and pray with you and be a blessing today. So Ken will come up and lead us in this one.